We good to go? Okay. Ride-alongs. To me, it's one of the very critical, crucial things for chaplains to do in order to build relationships with officers. There's two things that I hear regularly from the officers in my two departments about the other chaplains. Bobby, we don't know the other chaplains. And Bobby, why don't the other chaplains do ride-alongs? I don't have an answer for that. This is one of those willingness to do things. This is one of those presence things. This is that servant attitude. I don't have an answer for them. There's no way for me to adequately emphasize to you how much insight you will gain into the life of an officer by riding along. There's no way I can emphasize how much difference it will make as far as your ministry to individual officers. I can just tell you, it does. You keep in mind these things. You keep in mind that officer support thing. Patrol work can be hours of boredom. You know, I've ridden with officers, and we might go 3-4 hours, and there's not any radio traffic. Nobody's getting anything. And sometimes on snowy nights in January and February, that's the case. I mean, there's just, you know, people are staying inside. They're not being naughty. Also, I've ridden with officers when we've gone from one call to the next call to the next call to the next call. Ride-alongs, your department will have a policy on what they can and cannot do with you in the car. Initially, my officers could not go code 3 with me in the car. That's lights and sirens. But that changed. The first time I did a ride-along, I signed a waiver. I haven't signed one since. And I'm sure in the process of formulating things with Captain Boner being your liaison officer and the chief being on board and supportive of chaplains, they will put some things in place. It's not all going to happen at once. And I don't know what's left over from the when they had chaplains before. I don't know what's still around that's even in place. But I have a definition of a good day. And I've caught some flack from other chaplains about it, but that's okay too. My definition of a good day is all my officers go home at the end of the shift. If a bad guy doesn't go home, gee, I'm really sorry, but if my officer goes home, it's a good day. When I started as a chaplain, one of the first ride-alongs I did, he was a corporal then. He says, here's the shotgun release. If I'm in a situation I'm getting the crap kicked out of me, I expect to see you coming out of the car with a shotgun. Okay, as a brand new chaplain, that was pause for thought. Wasn't too sure about that. Wouldn't bat an eye now. Might not hit the broad side of the barn, but there's that sound of that kind of gets people's attention. But that's a decision that you've got to make. I've also caught some heat from other chaplains when I've said, if I had to use deadly force for my officer to go home, I would. And they didn't think that was an appropriate response for a chaplain. But you know, as you look at the shepherd image, the shepherd sometimes would kill a bear or a lion who was messing with one of his sheep. Would I want to send somebody into eternity? No. But if it's the difference between my officer going home and not going home, yeah, I'd probably do something.
But wouldn't there be some liability issues, you know, with
Oh, yeah.
as an untrained individual
Yep.
having a weapon and using
Yep.
deadly force?
Some departments mandate firearms training for their chaplains. So that covers part of it. Some departments insist that their chaplains carry concealed which that's not a level I really want to go to be honest with you. I don't know. You're going to have to kind of talk about some things with the department. And here's the thing. I'm glad you brought up liability because it is a concern. You should be covered under department liability if you are injured. You know, if you're riding along and somebody smacks the cruiser and you know, you break your arm or something, you should be covered. But you need to get that clarified with the chief to make sure that you're under the blanket of insurance. In a situation where, you know, a gun might be used, it's never happened. So I really can't tell you what the fallout is. The potential is certainly there. But it wouldn't be any different than a citizen coming up on a scene and assisting an officer. It'd be the same kind of thing. So I really don't have an answer for you there because I know of nothing in Nebraska where a chaplain has used a firearm. And most departments would avoid that like the plague. Now, my two department heads and my officers know that I would respond. And they've nodded and said, good. Now, what happens if it actually happens? I don't know. But you raise a very valid point, very valid concern. And it's not like at any situation I'm going to bail out of the car and get in the middle of a fight. Because usually, at least in Kearney, and I'm sure it's the same here, when there's some kind of situation, a 1034 physical, that's a fight, there's going to be more than one officer respond. You know, almost immediately when they assign it to one officer, another officer will say, I'm en route to back. So there's going to, a lot of those situations I would not be needed to try to intervene. I wish I had a better answer for you, but
That's fine. I just thought about, you know, I was just thinking if I were to get out there as Joe Amateur,
Yep.
and even though I'm representing the department and do something stupid, that there could be all kinds of ramifications and
Oh, yeah.
liability issues with that. And does the department want that kind of egg on their face from me trying to be helpful and doing something helpful?
That's where you've got to get some clarification specifically from your department. Now, the other side of it is, honestly, should one of our other chaplains be at a scene, they probably would be very hesitant for them to enter in because I've had more training. I mean, just what it boils down to. I know 3 ways to kill you with my bare hands. So, you know, I don't want to, but, you know, if you don't leave me a choice. So anyway, we're going to look at some things to do before, during, and not to do. So you have a handout for ride-alongs if you haven't located that in your notebook. And this isn't, you know, everything there is about ride-alongs, but this, you know, what we're trying to do today is give you enough to get you started. Before the ride-along, you need to find out what the department policy is going to be. Do you need to sign a waiver every time you ride? I would think after your chaplain group gets going that the waiver probably will disappear. I don't know that. I'm not going to speak for the chief. But you need to find out what's appropriate for me to wear. Well, in the winter, you need to dress warm. I mean, just be smart here. Because you may be at an accident scene. You may wind up at an accident scene. You may be standing beside the road. It's going to get cold out there. But, let's see, Sarpy County. I believe it's Sarpy County. Their chaplains have a uniform. When their chaplains ride, they are expected to wear their uniform. Their chaplains also wear vests. If they are in the chaplain car, if they are riding with an officer, they're wearing a vest.
I used to live in Sarpy County. Had his own chaplain car.
Yeah. They're about the only ones that do.
I was like, well, how do you do a ride-along if you got your own car?
Yeah, they have a lot of their department is a very, very, very supportive of chaplains. And their chaplain corps was actually started by 2 officers. They saw a need for chaplains. They saw a need for officers to have access to chaplains, and they came to one of our state meetings and got some initial training on chaplaincy and what to do and how to set it up and things like that. Went back and started chaplain corps. But now their chaplain corps is pretty solid. And they're volunteers. You know, there's not very many paid chaplains in the United States. The last figure I saw from the International Conference of Police Chaplains said there was 95 full salaried chaplains in the whole United States. And those are in big metropolises. You know, most, you know, a very high percentage. In fact, I only know a couple of paid chaplains. One's paid by the department, the other is paid by his local Baptist association. But the department furnishes him secretarial help and a car and office and some things like that, training money, stuff like that. But as far as salary, they don't salary him. That's the only two that's the only 2 I know. So you may need to make advance arrangements. I've been doing this long enough. I can show up and jump in a car with an officer. But you may need to contact, he mentioned Captain Story or Captain Boner, either one. It may boil down to you contacting the street supervisor, the sergeant who's on the street during that shift. You need to find out what the shifts are for Hastings PD. You know, ours are 6 to 6 and 6 to 6. Pretty easy. But you need to find out what the shifts are. If you want to be visible and not do a ride-along at that particular time, show up at shift change. You get contact with 2 shifts. I mean, that's a good way to do it. Bring donuts. You know. Cops do like donuts. There's 2 things cops like. They like to take people to jail, and they like donuts. Pretty simple. But anyway, you may have to make advance arrangements. If you're going to ride with State Patrol, and that's a whole different gig than riding with somebody inside the city limits or inside the county. It's a whole different gig. And I've done some ride-alongs with PD, with State Patrol, but not very many. You may need like a 3-day advance notice is what it used to be. You had to make arrangements 3 days ahead of time before your ride-along. So you're going to have to find out what the department's going to do here and how much notice and who to contact and that kind of stuff. Why are you there? You're not there for excitement. Officers will apologize to you and say, I'm sorry, nothing's going on. Affirm to them, you're not there for excitement. You're there to spend time with your officers. You know, that's why you're there. Officer support. Cultivate a servant attitude, a concern for your officers. They'll know whether you're real or not. You know, it may be a while before they start opening up. I've seen it happen both ways. First time I rode with one officer, he started telling me about his marital problems. Blew me away. Some of them still haven't gotten beyond Huskers and hunting. But you need to cultivate that attitude of, I am here for the officers. I'm not here for excitement. I don't care how fast we drive. I'm here for the officers. We talked about this some. Give some thought to what you're going to do if your officer needs assistance. The officer may tell you what you're going to do. You're going to stay in the car. I think they decided that wasn't going to work with me. But you need to decide that. You need to work through that because it could happen. The very first ride-along, and this will kind of fit as we move into what you're doing when you're actually doing a ride-along. The very first ride-along I went on was with an officer. We had stopped. We'd taken a report on a missing juvenile. We pulled up to a stop sign. Car goes by. He flips on the lights. He says, couldn't see their plates. Okay, understand there is no such thing as a routine traffic stop. It does not exist. So he says, just sit here, and the car pulled over, and so I'm watching, and as I'm watching, all of a sudden the officer's like this, and I'm kind of going, ooh, what do I do now? Well, he had recognized the individual in the back seat as having felony warrants out for him, armed and dangerous. Now, the knife he had was only about that long. But I learned several things that night. And I asked the sergeant about it later. I said, what do I do if I'm in that situation? He says, well, I know you don't know the 10 code right now, but give your location and just say, officer needs assistance, and then duck. And that was the instruction I got. Knowing where you are, you need to learn from your department how they give locations. In Kearney, the east-west street is always given first, and then the north-south. Okay? So if we were at the intersection of 2, 5, and 2, that's 25th Street, that's east and west, and 2 is north and south. You need to find out how your department gives locations. And you'll start developing an awareness of locations. If you're not sure what to do, say I'm next to the Arby's on Burlington. I mean, give them something, so they know where you are. That becomes very important for many reasons, but obviously. And another thing in related to that first incident, another thing I learned was always know the badge number of the officer that you're riding with. Because I didn't realize he'd already called for backup. As he's drawing his gun, he's on the radio to dispatch saying, 1089, which means I need some help here now. If you ever hear 1089, that means drop what you're doing and haul it over here now. And within 2 minutes, there was other police cars there. But learn the badge number of the officer that you ride with. Now, you also need to learn in Hastings, because I can't speak to it. I don't know how they do it. I don't know if they identify by car number. I don't know how they do that. I'm guessing they use badge numbers, which is what we do. But you need to kind of learn, get a feel for that too. Wear a vest. This really scares some chaplains. My kids really were the ones that convinced me to wear a vest. They said, Dad, you're in a police car. You're with an officer in uniform. They're going to think you're a plainclothes detective or an undercover cop or something. Well, that makes pretty good sense. And it wasn't long. It didn't take me very long to adapt to that. But I feel naked without one now. I'm reluctant to ride without a vest. Realize it is bullet resistant, not bulletproof. But you got a lot better chance with one on than without one. Now, most departments have some used vests. Most departments have some that technically it's going to say it's got an expiration date. Yeah. I remember in the Old Testament they put the priest out in front of the army. Yeah, same principle. I always figured one that says expired is better than nothing at all, which is where I started. I mean, that's what I started with, was old vests that were expired. But it's still going to have a level of effectiveness. Maybe not 100%, but it's going to slow things down a little bit. There's also, and should your department want to pursue this instead of giving you used vest, there is grant money available to help purchase vests for chaplains. Vests are expensive. I mean, the good ones are expensive. But should your department choose to expect you to wear a vest when you ride, there is some money available. So if you get into that, I'll get you the address on how to get it. Do some praying before you go to the station or on your way to the station. Never hurts to check in with the boss. Also, and you'll learn this as you do ride-alongs, go to the bathroom when you have the chance. Go before you go out on the street. If you come back to the station for the officer to do reports or something, go. If you swing into a business or something and he's taking a report and you had the opportunity, go. Because you don't know when that call's going to come where you're going to be standing on the side of the road at an accident scene, you're going to be there for 3 hours. So take advantage of bathroom when you can. Don't take pop or food into the car, the police car, unless the officer says it's okay. Some officers are very particular. That's their office. And they don't want people bringing a cup of pop in or coffee. Most of them are okay with it, but there's a few that are very particular about their cars, and they really don't want you to do that. So just, check and ask for permission before you start the ride along. Questions, thoughts, observations? Okay, we'll move to ride along do's. Be real, be yourself. Be genuine. Cops are suspicious by nature and training. Listen. I've mentioned know the badge number, the officer you're riding with. And you'll be surprised as you're around the station, you'll start identifying officers by badge number, not by name. Very seldom do I hear officers refer to somebody by name. They will refer to their badge number. That's part of their identity. And we'll look at that a little closer this afternoon when we look at police personality. We've talked about keeping your mouth shut. I know some things about officers that the department heads don't know. But they need to be sure, they need to know that you are not an information gathering device for the chief. And it's going to take you a while to prove that to them. You can convey that to them, and I would encourage you to express it. Hey, I'm not gathering information for Chief Cordham. But they're going to find out whether you mean that or not. Ask questions. Back up one to follow directions without question. If an officer says, for example, get out of the car and walk that way and don't come back until I tell you. That's not the time to ask why. Get out of the car, walk that way, stay there till the officer says, okay, you can come back. Follow directions, assist if requested. See, I was also an evidence officer for a while, so I kind of had several hats that kind of went like this sometimes, and sometimes I helped with the evidence at a scene. Not very often, but sometimes. But stay out of the way. You don't want to do anything to put your officer at jeopardy. You don't want them worrying about your safety when they need to be watching their own safety. Stay out of the way unless you're requested to do something or the officer's given you permission. Ask questions. They love to tell you about their job. Well, what does this computer do? What can you do with this? They'll tell you about the MDTs, mobile data terminal. They'll tell you about radar. They'll tell you about different things. But don't ask questions when your officer is getting radio traffic, which is another reason to know the badge number of your officer. Because dispatch will call them by their badge number. Be alert. We've talked about knowing how to tell where you are. I have trouble with that when I ride with the county. Lost in Buffalo County, man, I can't tell you. Now, most of the intersections, because of 911 necessity, have some kind of street sign, road name, road number, road letter, yeah.
Cars equipped with GPS anymore?
Most of them are. In fact, our department specifically went to GPS because the sheriff got lost after a call one time. And they didn't know where he was. But I would be in a mess if we lost control and wound up in a ditch in the county. I couldn't tell you where we are. I'd have to look for some kind of landmark. Well, there's a red barn about half a mile from here. In town, you got street lights, you got street corners, you got street signs. It's a lot easier. If you ever ride with a deputy out in the county, just realize you may not have a clue how to get back. One of the things that I've tried to tell people when I've talked to church groups is I encourage them to do a ride along once in a while, just to see. And here's what I'll tell them. I'll say, first of all, you're going to see a subculture in Kearney that you don't even know exists. And I think that would be true in Hastings. And then I kind of take a deep breath and I say, and you're going to see a subculture that no church in town is touching. And then the frowns start. And then I'll usually close by saying, and no church in town wants to. You think that's true? Yeah. What do you think, John?
Yeah, I think a lot of times we talk but don't want to roll up our sleeves and get our hands dirty.
Yeah. So be aware that if you're doing ride-alongs, you may see some things that you didn't know were happening in Hastings. You get called. You go with an officer to a domestic dispute. They can be kind of strange. I was with an officer one time. We were responding to check welfare, which means somebody has been trying to get a hold of this person, can't get a hold of them, wants somebody to check on them, see if they're alive or dead. This happened to be in a lower income apartment complex. And as we got to the door, I had a sense, just an overwhelming sense of the presence of evil. Couldn't put my finger on it. Wasn't sure what it was. This was a bad place. And we got inside, and there were some symbols on the wall. I'm going, I can't come up with it. I can't come up with it. And so I got back after we were done, and I did some checking, and they were all occult symbols. I hadn't seen some of them for a long time. That's why I couldn't come up with it. But I told the officer, I called him back up. I said, you listen to me. I said, this isn't just a domestic dispute or something. I said, there is a presence of evil there. You're dealing with something more than just human nature. Now, he happened to be a believer, one of the few that I've got. And he said, I appreciate that. Because he understood what I was saying. This was a satanic influence. I don't know if it was a gathering place for him or what, but the presence of evil was just overwhelming. You're going to get into some situations where you will have a sense of the presence of evil that they may not have. Doesn't mean you shouldn't go. It just means you need to be aware this is not going to Brahms or someplace for ice cream. This is a whole different kind of gig. We talked a little bit about the Radio 10 codes. We've talked a little bit about you deciding whether you'd use the shotgun or not. Buy a pop once in a while. You don't have to empty your pockets every time you ride with somebody, but once in a while say, hey, I'll get the pop tonight. If they pull into a convenience store, I'll get it tonight. Get it once in a while. That's a good thing. Be flexible. We've talked about how you don't know what you're really getting into. Thank the officer. Ride often. Ride every shift. Ride with as many different officers as you can.
What's the normal length of a ride?
A couple hours. I've gone from anywhere from an hour or so till 6 or 7. Kind of fits whatever fits your schedule, because it's your time and you're a volunteer. But if you can block off some time, a couple of times a month, ride for a couple hours, 3 hours, yeah. And it may depend on what the shift arrangement is here. I mean, if they go I don't know how many shifts they had. You know, Howland, how many shifts? Do they run 3 shifts? Or
That's my understanding.
so probably 6 to 2, 2 to 10, and 10 to 6 probably? Or do you know?
So I don't know 100%.
Okay, see, that might have not determine how long you ride. You might come in at 7 o'clock at night and ride till 10. That's 3 hours. That's the end of shift. That's a natural break point. Now, you also need to realize you may be planning for a 2-hour ride along. That doesn't necessarily happen. You know, I can't tell you how many times we've been en route back to the station for me to leave. We'd be 2 or 3 blocks from the station. They get a call. It's a hot call. They got to go right then. My ride-along time just got extended because they don't have time to take you to the station. You may plan to ride for 2 hours. You may be there for 4. But generally, they're pretty good about saying, well, how long did you want to ride tonight? So they have some idea. Okay, those are some do's. Any questions about do's? We'll look at don'ts. Don't bring your big pulpit Bible. I know. Power of the word. Whack. They're going to be very Huh? Yeah, there you go. They're going to have the concept that you're going to get in and preach to them anyway. Now, if you want to stick a little pocket New Testament or something, that's fine. But, don't feel witnessy. Yeah, there you go. Yeah, it's all on my phone. Yeah. We just talked about excitement, and you're there to spend time with the officers. Keep coming back to that. You're there for officer support. You're not there to be excited and get an adrenaline rush. You may get one, but that's not why you're there. And we just talked about don't always expect to be done at the time you thought you would. You are on their turf. You are a visitor. Even after you've been a chaplain for a long time, you are still sort of a visitor. You're part of the team, but you're on their turf, and you gotta react on their terms. Very, very important. We've talked a little bit about the weapon. Your department, I don't know what your department policy is, so you need to find out. I don't think my departments, either one, would allow me to carry. I don't think they would object if I had to hit the shotgun release and use the shotgun, but I don't think they want me carrying a gun. Don't be a cop wannabe. Our chaplain corps had to dismiss a chaplain several years ago because he wanted to be a cop. He was always calling stuff in. This guy just ran a stoplight, and he'd call it in, and he'd follow him, and he'd show up at scenes. He had a scanner, and he'd show up at scenes, and they finally said, "You're done. You are a chaplain. You are not a cop. You don't want to be a cop." There's a lot of training involved in becoming a cop. Don't pretend to know all there is to know about the officer's job. Well, I think you ought to do it this way. We've had an individual in Kearney that has ridden with officers and said, well, you should have arrested that person. And there wasn't grounds to arrest that person. And don't tell them how to do their job. Just common sense. Don't rearrange things in the cruiser without their permission. I've heard tales from officers of people that have ridden with them, and immediately they start moving stuff. Don't do that. There's times even now that as we pull up on something, I'll ask the officer before he gets out, do you want me to stay here, or is it okay for me to come? And most of the time they'll say, come on. If it's a situation where they don't know what they're getting into, out of concern for my safety, they will say, stay put till I find out what's going on. Again, you don't want them worried about your safety when they need to be concerned about their own safety. I can give you lots of examples about that, but there's some things that you will see cops doing And it's part of their training, it's part of officer safety, but every cop will do it. When they are interviewing someone, if they're talking with someone, they will turn this way if they're right-handed, because they're taking their weapon out of the direct line from that person. And most of the time, unless they're writing something down, you will see a hand on the gun. When they make a traffic stop, they will touch the hood on the way by, the trunk. You know why? You want to make sure it's latched so somebody doesn't spring up and start shooting them. We had an officer in Omaha killed that way, Jimmy Wilson, a few years ago. He made a traffic stop. He was still talking on his radio, and the back end of the car, it was a van, back in, the two doors open, and they opened fire, and he was dead right there. But, yeah, but if you see him touch that trunk hood, that's what they're doing. They're making sure the hood is latched, the trunk is latched. Yep. There's a lot of things that are officer safety specific, and you'll kind of pick up on some of those, but that's just one example. We've talked about don't put the officer at risk. You don't want to endanger your officers. Don't get in the way. Don't talk to the media. We'll touch. Yeah. I was telling Alan that the chief and another officer did a training for us at our state chaplain meeting on dealing with the media. And the officer said, there's no such thing as off the record. There's not. Now, I've had them come up to me at a suicide scene, and they're your best buddy, you know. They'll walk you back to your car, and they'll chat with you, and they're pumping you every step of the way, trying to find something out. The response I use many times is, the department has not authorized me to speak about this incident. That puts it on the department, you know, but it gets them off of you. They are predators. They will find something to eat. And if there's any rule that you want to adopt as just a general principle, don't talk to the media. Just period. It's just safer. You can be a distraction by talking too much. You know, it depends on what the situation is, but kind of choose your moments. Don't ride with just one officer. Don't speak for the officer, and don't criticize the department. Remember, you represent the department there.
And when you say don't ride with just one officer, you mean just the same officer all the time?
Right. Spread yourself out. You know, try to ride every shift. Try to ride with as many officers as you can. Now, some officers in my departments, they have the right to say, I don't want to ride along. And I'm sure they do here too. I don't know that, but I'm sure they do. But as many as will have you, ride when you can. I mean, it'll take you a couple of years to get through all the officers. And that's if you just rode with each of them once. But if you start developing a relationship, yeah, ride with one. You know, I've ridden with some officers more than others. But try to spread yourself out so that they don't think that you're exclusive, so that they think that you're their chaplain too. How many female officers does this department have? Any idea? Ride male and female. And I've only had one chaplain over the years, and she happened to be female riding with a male officer, that there was a problem, and it was because the officer was so nervous about having, first of all, a chaplain, second of all, a female chaplain. He had a wreck, and I mean, it was bad from the get-go. But I've only had, and she said, "Oh no, I won't do ride-alongs," because she had such a bad experience her first time. But it is one of the most important things that you can do. For some of these officers, you will become their pastor. Most of them don't have a pastor. But in your chaplain role, you have the opportunity to develop a relationship with that person so that when they need some help, they'll come to you. Questions about ride-alongs? Again, this isn't an extensive thing. It just gives you something to get started with. Okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to talk about death notification, and then we'll break for lunch. Okay? And then this afternoon we'll look at some things on police personality, some things to do and not do at crime scenes. Again, just kind of giving you an introduction. We'll talk about police personality, and then some specific things you can do for officer support. That's kind of where we're headed, so that you'll know. So, death notification. It's probably one of the things that officers hate more than anything else. There's not a good way to do it. There's ways that are better than others. There's some ways that are just bad. For example, an officer in Omaha was making a death notification, left a message on the answering machine. That's not a good way to do it. This one's really ironic, and these are two really worst case scenarios. It's ironic because the Department of Justice in Iowa produced the death notification manual that everybody uses. I mean, every training I've ever had on death notification has referred to this manual. And you'll see that as we look through the materials. Officer left a sticky note on the door. Not a good plan. Not a good plan. Now, cop humor will go something like this. Are you the widow Jones? Oh, we are now. Did you used to have a son named Jimmy? You know. Now that's what you'll hear in briefing room. Generally, they're pretty good around the public, but yeah, sometimes they kind of slide a little bit. It's one of the most disliked things that officers have to do. I'm not an expert on it. I've done a lot of them. I've done about 300, I guess, something like that. I've taught this to a lot of people. You go in with a general plan and you have to change it. That's that adaptability thing. You may have a person respond very calmly with, "Oh, okay. I just told you your husband died." You know, hello? We had one person respond by beating on the chest of the officer. You'll find some that fall apart. I mean, just hysteric. And everything in between. There's no way to predict. It is a very unique opportunity to provide some initial help to somebody in a situation that may be the hardest thing they've ever dealt with. Grief is very powerful. So I'm gonna walk you through a death notification, because this is something you will do. Our primary dispatch call in Buffalo County is death notification. And here's one of those pluses or minuses, depending on because the officers know me better, sometimes even when somebody else is next on call, they call me to go with them. They kind of like to have somebody they're comfortable with. Remember, it's always going to be the officer's call. We're going to talk about who takes the lead and that kind of stuff. The officer makes the decision. You are there for officer support. If he needs you to make the notification, you make the notification. If he needs you to step in afterwards with that initial comfort, because cops are not real touchy-feely. They don't like that stuff. Pastors tend to be a little more comfortable with it. But you have to kind of work that out with the officer that you're with. They know something is wrong. The person knows something is wrong when they open the door and they see a cop in uniform and somebody wearing a chaplain badge or hat or jacket or whatever. They know you're not there for pie and ice cream. So right away, they react. So look at your handout on death notification. The Department of Iowa manual that I referred to talks about 5 steps. In person, in time, in pairs, in plain language, and with compassion. That's about as basic as you can get. If you don't get anything else out of what we're going to cover right now, if you come away with that, you've got a pretty good start on how to do this. The first one I made, I hadn't had any training as a pastor. I'd been at the hospital and people died and all that stuff. I'd never told somebody dead. So, the officer I was making the notification with, it was his first one too. Fortunately for us, this notification took place at the hospital. There was a little lady that had surgery, and she was waiting for her husband to come pick her up, and he died in the motel. Fortunately for us, the charge nurse had done it enough times to know what to do. And so they moved her roommate out so we could talk to her. The charge nurse took the lead. I'd been in a wreck. I had a broken bone in my hand. I didn't know I had a broken bone in my hand. The nurse introduced me as a chaplain, and she grabbed hold of my hand, and she about put me on my knees. And the tears I was shedding was not because her husband died. It's because she was killing me, because she put a vice grip on it. But in person, as quickly as we could, we made the notification. There was 3 of us. At least you want at least 2. In plain language, and as compassionate as we could, we told her husband had died. Now, you also have a sheet following that. I think is where I put it. Guidelines from Oklahoma City. You're going to find basically the same kind of stuff. I could show you the procedure set out by the Mothers Against Drunk Driving organization. Has 19 steps. They summarize it in the last step with in person, in time, in pairs, in plain language, and with compassion. Now, I'm going to try to walk you through a death notification. And you're going to see how those 5 elements are evident. I'm going to group it before you get to the door, when you're at the door, when you're inside the door, and when you leave. That gets you through the whole process. So that's where we're headed. In person. This is before you get to the door. You're going. In person. You don't do this over the phone. Now, many times that secondary notification, when they start contacting family members, is by phone. We're talking about the initial death notification. There's been a fatality accident, somebody committed suicide, somebody drank, whatever it is. This is the initial notification that someone has died. And you're always going to try to get the closest next of kin that you can. Sometimes that's pretty tricky. But we're not talking about secondary stuff, second level. We're talking about that initial knock on the door, John's not coming home. Okay? That's what we're talking about on death notification. You don't know what you're going to get into. Let's say you had to make a notification to a little lady who'd been married for 60 years that her husband wasn't going to come home from the grocery store. And you call her. She has a coffee table full of medications that she takes. You could have a medical crisis as she responds to the news and not be able to assist her in any way if you do it on the phone. You go. because they may react medically. We had to take one guy to the hospital. He went into shock. He went into medical shock when we told him his wife and 2 daughters were killed. So you don't know what kind of health situation. You may have to transport them. It's going to be it's traumatic enough in person. It's hard enough in person. But that initial notification, unless it's a very rare circumstance, you do it in person. We've had, I think in the time I've been doing this, I think we've had 2 that it was such an unusual situation, we had to do it on the phone. One, the guy was farming up by Valentine somewhere. And there wasn't any way, we offered to come. We offered to contact law enforcement there to give him information. He wanted to be told on the phone. So you kind of go with what you get. In time, as soon as possible, your department is not going to have you make a notification unless they're pretty sure who's dead. Well, we think it's Susie. And they're not going to send you. They're going to be pretty sure it's Susie. So as quickly as you can. We had one situation where the wreck took place by NTV. They wanted us to make notification before the 6 o'clock news because it was going to be on the 6 o'clock news. And we had trouble finding family. And it got a little complicated. But as quickly as you can, when law enforcement is ready to make the notification, you go make it. You may not have all the information you need, but as soon as you got positive ID and who needs to be notified, they're going to send you. Yeah.
Who's responsible? Is it the agency that uncovers the accident, or the agency that oversees where the victim's family lives, and how does that?
It could go either way. That's a very valid question, because in the county, the sheriff's office will be working the accident. They may request us, and it's happened with our 2 departments, because our two departments share records people, they share dispatchers, they share chaplains, they share equipment, they have training together. There's a lot of crossover in my 2 departments. But there's been times when the accident's taken place in the county and they've asked the PD to make the death notification. There's been other times when the accident's been in the county and the county will make the death notification. The one I dislike the most is another jurisdiction completely, like Box Butte County or something like that, would call us and say, we've got a fatality accident, we want you to go notify somebody. My experience with other jurisdiction notifications is they never give us enough information. And our dispatch will always confirm. They will call back, because there have been prank calls where people have called in and said, well, this is the sheriff of such and such place, and so-and-so's dead. We need to have them notified. And found out it was a hoax, not in our county. But that's happened where people have called in a hoax. Pretty cruel, huh? So does that kind of give you, I mean,
I just didn't know how the protocol worked.
Generally speaking, and this is a general rule, whoever works the scene does the notification. That's generally the way it works for us. And sometimes there's cooperation, like the county and the city, you know, if they need help getting somebody in the city notified. And it's gone the other way too. When they're
I assume it's just one notification, and then after that, it's the family's responsibility to disseminate it.
Right.
Beyond that.
Now, we will offer, you know, if they've got, let's say they've got a relative that lives in North Platte, we will offer to contact law enforcement there to go make an in-person notification. Sometimes they accept that, sometimes they say, no, we'll take care of it. But that initial closest relative notification is one, and you're done. Now, you become a Band-Aid. You're not going to have long-term contact with this person.
Right.
You are there for some initial support. You may never see him again. We've had situations, and we'll get to this in just a second, where we've called their pastor to come, and I'll show you some stuff about that in a minute. But we try not to leave people alone, but we've also had people tell us to leave. Okay. Not much you can do about that. But generally speaking, the agency that works the scene will make the notification.
That's what I was trying to get.
Yeah, you got to wrap your head around that, because sometimes it gets a little complicated. For example, and why they do it, part of the reason is they don't have chaplains, but State Patrol generally does it by themselves. If State Patrol's working it, they'll go make the notification. They won't involve a local agency. If somebody from here is killed in Sydney, they'll contact troopers out there to go make the notification. But they won't contact the local sheriff or the PD. Can't tell you why, other than, to my knowledge, State Patrol has one chaplain that's designated as State Patrol chaplain. Well, there's no way he can cover the whole state of Nebraska. I mean, that's impractical and impossible. So, but I am grateful that our dispatch tries to confirm and get us as much information. Sometimes they will give us a name and who to notify. We have to find an address. I mean, you think about it. Somebody's traveling. They may not have their contact list in their billfold. Their phone may have been smashed in the wreck. They can't call things up. There's been times, and I really hate this, when we don't even get the birthday of the person that died. Well, you don't have a real lot of ways to confirm who you got if you don't have a birthday. You can't ask Mrs. Jones, is your husband's name John? Well, yeah. Well, we think John was killed. You understand what I'm saying? Okay. Before you get there, your pager goes off or your phone rings, however it is, you're praying for yourself, your officer, and the family. You're getting in a spiritual mindset. Where you go may vary. I've been dispatched to the station to meet with an officer to go. I've been dispatched to scenes, met with an officer there, then gone to make a notification. We've made a notification on a parking lot at the mall because somebody had gone to the mall, couldn't find them where they were. Neighbor said, I think they're at the mall in Kearney. Went to the mall. Gone to businesses. I mentioned the one I did in the hospital. And where you go may vary. I mean, there is no rule. You got to decide who's going to take the lead. If you and one officer are going, you got to decide who's going to do the introductions, who's going to essentially get you in the door. Inappropriate to be standing at the door going, are you going to take the lead or am I? Oh, hi. You don't want to be doing that when they open the door. You want to have that resolved when you walk up to the door. Before you get to the door, you got to know who's going to take the lead. And it usually will work into a tag team operation with the officer. And my officers do it both ways. Sometimes they will say, I'll take the lead. Sometimes I wish they hadn't. And some of them will say, you take the lead. You've done so many of these, you take the lead. It doesn't matter. In pairs. So here's 3 of the 5 steps are right here. In person, in time, in pairs. Don't go alone. Sometimes they'll even suggest going in separate cars because you may have to stay a little longer. The officer may get another call. They can't stay all day. You may have to stay till their pastor gets there or something. I've had officers leave me and say, you got your radio, if you need something, you call me, we'll be right back. But they had to go respond to another call. A couple of situations, I'd just assume they stayed, but, there was never a problem. But we try as best as we can to stay there till we get somebody there. Our sheriff made one time, and he's given me permission to share this, so I do. He made a death notification by himself. He got into a multicultural family situation. And it went bad. I mean, they just went, bleh! And when he came back, he looked like he'd been in a boxing match. I mean, he was just beat up emotionally, physically. He said, I will never do that again. I will never make one by myself again. and he's been in law enforcement for quite a while. You just don't know what you're going to get into. So those are things before you get to the door. Then there's some helpful hints. You don't take the personal effects of the item of the person when you make the notification. Now, from an evidence standpoint, some of that stuff's going to be evidence, so they couldn't have it right away anyway. But those that study grief and dying say that you will intensify their grief if you bring their stuff when you make the notification. Will they want that stuff? Yes, they will. Should they have it right then? Probably not. Because they see those personal effects of the individual, it's going to intensify their grief. So avoid that. That's going to be something law enforcement will be dealing with, but you need to be aware of and if they ask your opinion, say, I'd say let's give it to them later. I know what cops eat, chili dogs with onions, and a breath mint might be appropriate, piece of peppermint. We take the little travel packages of Kleenex, and this came as a result of learning that may not be a Kleenex in the room, and if they start crying and sneezing and slinging snot, and you kind of want a Kleenex available, at least something to get you by till you can find a box of Kleenex. So we take those. We have a death notification packet, and I'll pass these around so you can look at the materials. We found it's been helpful to give them something. There's so many grief materials out there that you can kind of pick and choose whatever best suits your department and your city. The stuff we use comes from Batesville Casket Company. If you don't know it, Batesville Casket Company has an incredible amount of grief stuff. They have pamphlets, they have tapes, they have DVDs, they have books. They've got all. And so in our packet, we have several things. This is just a list of the 12 freedoms of healing and grief. Alan Wolfeld, if you ever have the opportunity to hear him, he has a center for transition and loss in Colorado. Excellent speaker, understands the whole grief process, understands what needs to be done. A bibliography of just some other grief materials. I think I put in your notebook a handout that we have. It's probably behind that, but just a sheet that one of our officers produced where you can list the if there's a contact number. If it's in another jurisdiction like we were talking about, you can list who they need to contact in that jurisdiction. Just some information. Yeah, keep going. There, that one. It's got an empty shield on it, on the front of it. Just some generalized things about grief. We include a pamphlet about helping yourself heal during the holidays, helping yourself heal, 5 myths about grief. And those are the things that we have in our packet. We also have some specialized packets dealing with suicide and homicide and when a child dies and helping SID survivors. So, feel free to take a look at these. Again, it's just an example of what we do, but we have those materials with us. So all that stuff's before you get to the door.
That material, how do you get a hold of that? Who takes care of it?
We have had access to a car. We don't right now, but we would keep a supply in the Chaplain car. We've changed our on-call setup. So now we just kind of make them available to the chaplains where they've got them. We've got some at the station. So if they're called to the station, they can pick one up there. But some of the officers carry them just so we have something to give to the person when we go.
And purchasing that stuff.
We have access to a little bit of money from the pop machine. And our Spouses Association has done some things to help us there too. But that's a valid question, because if you're operating on shoestring and don't have a budget, you may not be able to do that. But one of your funeral homes may be willing to donate some pamphlets or something. But that's something that we assemble. We have available in several different avenues. so that we have something when we go make a death notification. Okay, so that's all before you get to the door. Okay, now you're at the door. You're still praying, and I'm not talking about putting on your best preacher voice, oh God, please help us in this terrible time. Your presence at the doorstep tells them something's wrong. Identify yourself. This is where the person who's taking the lead takes the lead. You clearly identify yourself. I'm Chaplain Bobby Payne with the Kearney Police Department. This is Sergeant Jason Cotters. You identify who you are. Make that very clear. Make sure you're at the right place. Is this the home of John Jones? Well, no, John lives down the street. He just moved about 3 weeks ago. Okay, well, thank you for your time. And well, what's wrong? Well, we need to talk with the Jones family. You don't want to notify somebody else before you notify the family. But you want to try to, as best as you can, verify where you are. Now, if you do anything with the county, you may get out to make a county call, and there may not be a house number. The deputy may know where they live by, a barn or a bridge or something like that. But you still want to make sure, as best as you can, you're at the right place. How many Juan Rodriguez's do you suppose there are in this county? How many John Smiths are there? So you're going to have to do a little probing, to see if you're at the right place. Find out who you're talking with. Is this the home of John Jones? Well, yes, it is. Are you Mrs. Jones? Well, no, I'm the babysitter. Okay. Time out again. Oh, well, do you know where Mrs. Jones is? We need to give her some information. Again, you don't want to notify the housekeeper before you notify the spouse. But find out who you're talking to. Try to come in. Ask to come in. Could we come in and sit down with you and share some information with you? You may not get in. We've had a few cases where we've made notifications on the doorstep because they wouldn't let us in. There's no guarantee just when they open the door and see an officer in uniform, they're going to let you in. It's not a guarantee. But you ask to come in. You try to put them off as best as you can. Some of them will insist right there. I want to know what's going on right now. Okay. But you want to try to get in. You want to try to be in a little more contained environment as best as you can. You want to try to figure out how many people are there. If you're walking up to the door and you see toys in the yard, you know there's kids. You need to be aware of that. This may be one of the places where having two for notification makes a difference, because sometimes part of the notification team will take the kids to another room, and the other notifier will talk to the spouse or the adult child or whoever it is. So that's another reason to have a pair, is that sometimes you need to maybe separate. But you also want to be aware in case Aunt Matilda comes out of the back bedroom. And we had to call another jurisdiction to make a notification for us a few years ago. We found out before we contacted this other agency that they were going to have to go to a family reunion to locate this individual. So we told them going into it, you're walking into a family reunion. So they at least had some awareness that they were walking into a group setting of family members, and they weren't going to be received real well. But try to kind of appraise the situation when you're at the door. And we had one situation where a lady came to the door, saw the deputy, said, "Oh, it must be bad news," and slammed the door. And he kind of looked at me, and I kind of looked at him. Your call. What do we do now? Now, fortunately, she didn't go to the back bedroom and lock the door and stay there for the next 30 minutes. I mean, it was what seemed like a long time. I know it wasn't, but it seemed like a long time. She opened the door, and we were able to confirm where we were and asked to come in and that kind of stuff. So that's when you're at the door. You're introducing. You're trying to figure out maybe how many people you're dealing with, and you're trying to get in. That's basically what you're doing at the door. Unless, we need to stop for a second? Okay, we'll stop just long enough to change disc.